Hello friends, welcome back. First of all, tell me where in the world you're watching my video from. The phone began to vibrate in the dark long before the sound registered in his mind. Curtis Lawson surfaced slowly from sleep, the way a man does after years of midnight alarms and emergency calls. His body reacted before his thoughts did. Heart tightening, breath shallow, the old instinct rising like a reflex carved in a bone. No one calls at this hour unless something is wrong. The clock on the nightstand glowed a dim, merciless blue. 4:32 a.m. Curtis reached for his glasses, fingers clumsy, the room still thick with shadows. The name on the screen swam into focus only after a second too long. Lydia, his daughter-in-law. Hawaii. Before he answered, something deep in his chest shifted, an almost imperceptible pressure, like the air before a storm. 35 years on the force had taught him this feeling. It arrived before gunshots, before confessions, before doors kicked in too late. He pressed accept. Curtis, Lydia said. Her voice trembled, but it didn't break. Not the way grief breaks a person. It wavered just enough to sound convincing, practiced enough to feel rehearsed. I have terrible news. Curtis sat upright in bed. Brandon is dead. The words landed without sound. No echo. No space to breathe around them. Just a blunt force to the center of his chest. Dead. His son. His only child. Curtis didn't speak. He couldn't. The silence stretched, and Lydia filled it quickly, as if afraid it might expose something. He drowned yesterday evening, she continued, during a sunset cruise in Maui. He slipped overboard. The currents were strong. Curtis stared at the wall across from him. The framed photo of Brandon at 12 years old. Missing teeth, swim goggles pushed up on his forehead, blurred and doubled. Drowned. The word didn't fit. It scraped against everything Curtis knew. What happened, he finally asked, his voice rough, unfamiliar. We were on the boat, Lydia said. Brandon was taking pictures near the rail. A wave hit. He lost his footing. It all happened so fast. There was again that feeling. Not disbelief. Not denial. Recognition. The Coast Guard searched, Lydia said. She paused, just long enough to suggest tragedy. They couldn't find him. Curtis closed his eyes. Brandon had been swimming since he was 6. Competitive by 14. State finals by 17. Even at 40, his son swam laps 3 mornings a week, rain or shine. He had once crossed Puget Sound in open water for charity, laughing about it afterward like it was nothing. Drowning didn't make sense. But shock has a way of numbing logic. I'm so sorry, Lydia added, quieter now. The funeral has already been handled. Cremation. Just like you wanted. That was when the alarm bell went off. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a sharp, internal click. Curtis opened his eyes. No, he said. Lydia didn't respond right away. Brandon never wanted to be cremated, Curtis continued. His voice steadied as he spoke, instinct sharpening his words. He told me that. Many times. After Louise died, 10 years earlier, they had talked about it. About burial. About family plots. Brandon had been clear. He wanted to rest beside his mother under the oak at Evergreen Cemetery. He had hated the idea of fire. Hated it with an intensity Curtis had never understood, but never questioned. Curtis, Lydia said, and now something colder crept in her tone. That's what he told me. He was very clear. Curtis said nothing. And there's something else you should know, she continued, abruptly changing direction. About Brandon's estate. There it was. The shift. The line that didn't belong in a conversation about death. The lawyers confirmed everything, Lydia said. The life insurance policy. The house. His accounts. They all come to me. Curtis felt his hands curl in a fist. You get nothing. The words were delivered cleanly. Efficiently. Like terms being read aloud. You should know that before you book a flight, she added. There's really no reason for you to come. Then the line went dead. Curtis sat in the darkness. Phone still pressed to his ear, listening to silence where his world had just been erased. The clock ticked forward. 4:34 a.m. 2 minutes. That was all it had taken. He lowered the phone slowly and stared at it, as if it might explain itself. Something was wrong. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that begged panic. In a quiet, terrible way that told him this was not grief speaking. It was strategy. Curtis swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood. The house felt hollow, too large without Louise's presence to anchor it. Outside, Queen, and was still asleep, streetlights glowing like distant sentries. He walked to the kitchen and poured himself black coffee he didn't want and couldn't taste. His hand shook just enough to notice. Who talks about money before sorrow? Who tells a father he gets nothing, while his son is still warm in memory? Curtis opened his phone again, his movements slow, deliberate. Unread messages. One stood out. Sent yesterday at 4:17 p.m. From Brandon. Dad, I need to talk. It's about Lydia. Something's not right. Can we meet this weekend? Curtis felt the air leave his lungs. His son had reached out, and he hadn't answered. He pictured Brandon typing those words, hesitating, debating whether to send them, trusting his father enough to try. And Curtis had been at a retirement dinner, laughing with old colleagues, phones silenced out of courtesy. Guilt arrived without mercy. 3 years earlier, Curtis thought back to the first time Brandon had brought Lydia home for brunch. She had been beautiful, polished, effortlessly charming. She laughed at the right moments, asked the right questions. But Curtis had felt it even then. That faint buzz at the base of his spine. The way her smile stopped just short of her eyes. The way she steered conversations toward Brandon's job, his bonuses, his future, toward numbers. Louise would have noticed immediately. She always did. She had been sharper than any badge Curtis ever wore. But Louise was gone. And Curtis had told himself he was being overprotective. That Brandon was grown. That love deserved trust. He had stayed silent. Now his son was dead, and the woman he married had erased him with paperwork and fire. Curtis stood at the kitchen window as the sky began to pale. He didn't book a flight to Hawaii. Not yet. Instead, he did what he had done for most of his life when things didn't add up. He started asking questions. The first call went out at exactly 6 a.m. Curtis, Roland Hughes answered, his voice thick with sleep. It's 6 in the morning. You better be calling because you won the lottery. I need a favor, Curtis said. A big one. Roland was quiet now. What's wrong? My son, Curtis said. His wife says he drowned in Maui. But something's not right. He told Roland everything. The cremation, the money, the text message, the coldness that had replaced grief. Read that message again, Roland said. Curtis did. There was a pause on the line. You're thinking what I'm thinking, Roland said finally. Yeah. I'll run her, Roland said. Full background. Lydia Taylor. Maiden name Lawson, you said. Yes. I'll call you back. The wait felt endless. Curtis paced his living room, stopping occasionally to stare at Brandon's childhood photos. Swim meets. Graduation. The wedding day. Brandon beaming. Lydia radiant in white. 45 minutes later, his phone rang. Curtis, Roland said. Sit down. Curtis did. 6 months ago, Roland continued. Lydia took out a $3 million life insurance policy on Brandon. Curtis closed his eyes. She's the beneficiary, Roland added. Of course she is. That's not all, Roland said. She's been married before. Curtis felt his stomach drop. A man named Michael Bradford, Roland continued. Died 2 years ago. Ow! Drowning. Bahamas. Snorkeling trip. Body never recovered. Ruled accidental. The room tilted. Insurance payout. Roland added quietly. 1.5 million. 2 husbands. 2 drownings. 2 payouts. That's a pattern, Roland said, though Curtis didn't need him to say it. She killed them, Curtis whispered. We don't know that yet, Roland replied. But if your son is dead, this becomes a homicide investigation. And if he's not, she thinks he is, Curtis said, or wants everyone else to. I'll send you everything I have, Roland said. But Curtis, be careful. If she's done this before, and she knows you're looking, your problem. Curtis hung up and stared at Brandon's message again. Something's not right. His son had known, and Curtis had almost ignored it forever. By noon, Curtis was on a plane to Maui, not to grieve, but to hunt the truth. As the aircraft lifted off, he made a silent promise to the empty seat beside him. I'm coming for you, son, dead or alive, and I won't stop until I know. Because one thing was now certain. This wasn't an accident, and whatever Lydia had planned depended on silence, distance, and time. Curtis Lawson intended to destroy all 3. The plane descended through a veil of pale clouds, and Maui rose beneath Curtis like a postcard that didn't belong to him. Turquoise water caught the sun and threw it back in blinding shards. Palm trees bent lazily in the breeze. From above, the island looked untouched by grief, untouched by death. It looked like a lie. Curtis didn't feel like a tourist when his feet hit the jet bridge. He felt like a man walking into enemy territory. Every laugh, echoing through the terminal, grated against his nerves. Families in bright shirts dragged rolling suitcases past him, their vacations intact, their worlds unbroken. His wasn't. He rented the first car offered and drove straight out of the airport, windows down, warm ocean air rushing in. It smelled like salt and flowers and something sweet that made his chest ache. Brandon had loved Hawaii. He had talked about retiring here one day, about teaching kids to swim, about living where the ocean never froze. Curtis tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The Ocean Breeze Resort appeared, just as Lydia had described. Polished, pristine, curated for happiness. A place designed to erase unpleasant thoughts. He parked, stepped out, and stood for a moment in the open-air lobby. Somewhere inside this place, people had laughed while his son vanished. Somewhere near this shoreline, Lydia had rehearsed her story. Curtis approached the front desk. The manager's nameplate read Clayton Hart. "I'm Curtis Lawson," Curtis said. "Brandon Lawson's father." Clayton's expression shifted instantly into practiced sympathy. "I'm so sorry for your loss, sir. Your daughter-in-law has been absolutely devastated." Curtis studied his face, the subtle tightening around the eyes, the relief beneath the concern. People like neat stories. They like tragedies with clean endings. "I'd like to see her," Curtis said. "She's in room 412, Clayton replied. "I can call up." "Don't," Curtis interrupted. "I'll surprise her." Something flickered across Clayton's face. A hesitation he masked quickly. "Of course," he said. The elevator ride felt longer than it was. Curtis watched the numbers climb and felt his pulse keep time with them. He hadn't seen Lydia since the wedding. That day, she'd worn white and smiled like a woman stepping into her future. Now he wondered how long she'd been planning to erase his son from it. He knocked. The door opened almost immediately. Lydia stood there in black yoga pants and a tank top, hair pulled back, mascara smudged just enough to sell exhaustion. She looked startled, but only for a second. "Curtis," she said, "I didn't expect you so soon." Her eyes flicked past him, down the hallway, calculating. "The cremation is already done," she added quickly. "There's really no reason." "I want to know what happened," Curtis said. "Everything." She stepped aside. The room was chaos disguised as normalcy. An open suitcase on the bed. Clothes folded too neatly for a woman supposedly undone by grief. A faint scent of perfume hung in the air. "The sunset cruise," Lydia began softly. "We just finished dinner." Brandon was taking photos near the rail. A wave hit the boat, and he slipped. Curtis watched her hands. They trembled, but not from sorrow, from effort. "The current was strong," she continued. By the time they turned back, she let the sentence trail off, eyes filling, voice catching at exactly the right places. "Where's his body?" Curtis asked. Her breath hitched. "The Coast Guard searched for 2 days," she said. "They said with currents like that. No remains," Curtis said flatly. "No," Lydia admitted. "Not yet. And no death certificate." Something flashed in her eyes. Irritation. Fear. "They said one could be issued later," she replied quickly. Curtis knew the law. Without a body, Brandon wasn't dead. He was missing. And under Hawaii law, missing people didn't become dead for 7 years. 7 years meant no insurance payout. Unless a body appeared. "I'm going to the police," Curtis said. "They already know everything." Lydia replied too fast. Curtis turned and left. At the Maui Police Department, he was directed to Officer Timothy Holland, the Coast Guard liaison. The man shook Curtis's hand firmly, eyes tired but honest. "I was on the search," Holland said. "I'm sorry about your son. Is there a death certificate?" Curtis asked. "No, sir," Holland replied. "Without remains, it's a missing person. 7 years before legal death." Curtis nodded. Outside, the sun beat down mercilessly. His phone buzzed. "Unknown number. Stop looking. He's gone." Curtis stared at the message. Someone was watching him, and that meant one thing. He was right. That night, sleep was impossible. Every time Curtis closed his eyes, Lydia's voice replayed in his head. Not the words, but the cadence. The performance. The cracks where truth should have been. By morning, he knew he couldn't do this alone. Everett Shaw's office sat above a surf shop on Front Street in Lahaina. The sign was modest. discreet. Exactly the kind of place you went when you needed answers no one wanted found. Everett himself looked like the kind of man who never truly relaxed. Sharp eyes, still posture, the kind of quiet presence that noticed everything. Curtis Lawson, Everett said as Curtis stepped inside. Retired Seattle PD. Curtis nodded. My son is missing. His wife claims he drowned. I believe she's lying. Everett listened without interrupting as Curtis laid it all out. The text, the insurance, the previous husband, the threat. When Curtis finished, Everett leaned back slowly. That's a clean pattern, he said. And patterns don't lie. What do you need? Curtis asked. 24 hours. Everett replied. If your son's alive, someone here knows where he is. Curtis hated waiting, but he trusted professionals who didn't rush. The call came the next morning. Come now, Everett said. Curtis arrived in 15 minutes. Everett's laptop glowed with images and timelines. Lydia's been involved with a man named Gavin Mercer, Everett said. Water sports instructor at the resort. A photo appeared. Fit, tanned, confident. They've been discreet, Everett continued, but not discreet enough. Security footage rolled. Lydia and Gavin stood beside a white pickup, kissing. The timestamp read 2 days before Brandon's disappearance. Curtis felt something harden in his chest. There's more, Everett said. Gavin owns a boat, uses it for snorkeling and fishing charters. But he's also been making trips to the outer islands. A satellite map filled the screen. On the day Brandon vanished, Everett said, Gavin canceled all bookings, claimed illness. But his boat left harbor at 6 a.m. and returned after dark. Where did he go? Curtis asked. Everett zoomed in. A private island appeared, isolated, owned by a shell company. Another image popped up. A familiar boat docked at a small pier. This image is from yesterday morning, Everett said. That boat's been there 4 days. Curtis felt his breath catch. He's there, he whispered. Everett nodded. I believe so. When do we move? Tonight, Everett said. Recon only. If they see us coming, they'll kill him. Curtis stared at the island on the screen. Somewhere out there, his son was alive, or waiting to be erased. As night fell, Curtis stood on a dock staring at black water. At 70 years old, he thought his days of danger were over. He was wrong. The boat slipped away from shore under a quarter moon, silent and purposeful. Maui's lights faded behind them. At 12:50 a.m., Everett cut the engine. There, he whispered. A dark shape rose from the water. A dock. A cabin. One glowing window. They paddled in silence. Curtis crept forward, heart pounding so hard it felt visible. Voices drifted from inside. Gavin's voice. Another week, he said. That's enough time. Keep him sedated. Then we make it look like he drowned trying to escape. Same story as before. Curtis's hands curled into fists. Lydia stepped outside, relaxed, smiling. 1 more week, she said. Then we're free. 3 million free. Curtis froze as her gaze swept toward the water. Did you hear something? She asked. Just waves, Gavin replied. They went back inside. Curtis retreated with Everett, shaking with rage and relief. I saw him, Curtis whispered once they were clear. He's alive. Yes, Everett said. And now we do this right. Curtis looked back toward the darkness where the island hid. Lydia's plan depended on time, and time was almost gone. Curtis did not sleep. He sat in the dim quiet of Everett's office as dawn bled slowly into the sky, replaying what he had seen through that cabin window again and again. Brandon's pale face, the rope biting in his wrists, the steady rise and fall of his chest that proved, without question, that his son was still alive. Alive and scheduled to die. Every instinct Curtis had ever trusted screamed the same warning. Time was no longer an abstract threat. It was a countdown. Everett moved calmly, methodically, already making calls. He understood something Curtis did too well. Panic killed people faster than bullets. Lydia and Gavin had rehearsed their plan for months. They would not hesitate if they sensed interference. By mid-morning, Curtis's phone buzzed constantly. Roland from Seattle. Officers Curtis hadn't spoken to in years. Every call tightened the web. But there was one call Curtis cared about more than all the rest. Captain Ernest Boyd of the Maui Police Department. They met inside Boyd's office shortly after 9. Boyd was a man carved from procedure and patience. Gray hair cut short, eyes that didn't flinch easily. He had heard lies from murderers and truth from broken people. He trusted neither without proof. Curtis didn't waste time. "My son is alive," he said. "He's being held on a private island 15 miles offshore. His wife and her accomplice planned to kill him within a week." Boyd didn't react. Not outwardly. "That's an extraordinary claim," he said evenly. Curtis nodded. "That's why I brought proof." Everett opened the laptop. The room filled with silence, broken only by the hum of electronics, as images appeared. Grainy photographs taken through the cabin window. Brandon bound to the bed. Thin, unshaven, alive. Boyd leaned forward. Everett played the audio next. Gavin's voice, casual, confident. "Another week. Make it look like he drowned, trying to escape. Same story as before." Boyd's jaw tightened. Then came a timeline. Michael Bradford, Bahamas. Drowning. No body. Insurance payout. Then Brandon. Maui. Same method. Bigger policy. Finally, the security footage. Lydia and Gavin kissing beside the white pickup 2 days before Brandon vanished. Boyd exhaled slowly. "This is substantial," he said. "And if you're right, we don't have the luxury of delay." Curtis leaned forward. "How fast can you move?" Boyd stood. 2 hours. Water police, Coast Guard, tactical units. We do this by the book." 2 hours felt like an eternity. Curtis paced the corridor outside Boyd's office, forcing himself to breathe, to remember discipline. He had been on the other side of operations like this. He knew the danger of rushing. Still, the image of fire, of Lydia's earlier insistence on cremation, would not leave him. At 10:45 a.m., 3 vessels left the harbor. Curtis stood on the command boat, hands gripping the rail, as Maui shrank behind them. The ocean stretched endlessly ahead, deceptively calm. Then Everett stiffened beside him. "Smoke," he said. Curtis followed his gaze. A dark column rose against the blue sky. Thick, black, unmistakable. The radio crackled instantly. "All units, this is command. Heavy smoke at target location. Repeat, heavy smoke. This is now an active rescue." The engines roared. Curtis's heart slammed against his ribs. They were out of time. As the island came into view, flames tore through the cabin roof. Fire climbed greedily, devouring wood and lie alike. Brandon was inside. The boats slammed into shore. Officers poured out, weapons raised, voices sharp and controlled. "Maui PD. Hands up. Don't move." Lydia and Gavin were already running. Straight for the dock, straight for escape. They froze when they saw themselves surrounded. Curtis didn't wait. Protocol screamed at him to stay back. Training demanded restraint. He ignored all. He ran toward the fire. "Curtis!" Everett shouted. "No." The heat hit him like a wall. Smoke burned his eyes. He pulled his shirt over his mouth and lunged through the doorway. Inside was chaos. Fire roared along the walls. The ceiling groaned, ready to collapse. Smoke swallowed everything. "Brandon!" Curtis shouted, but his voice vanished into the inferno. He dropped to the floor, crawling blind, lungs screaming. His hands hit metal, then rope, then skin. "Brandon," he rasped. His son lay unconscious, bound, unmoving. Curtis fumbled at the knots, hands shaking, panic threatening to overwhelm muscle memory. A knife flashed through the smoke. "Everett!" 3 swift cuts. The ropes fell away. "Go!" Everett shouted. Together, they dragged Brandon through smoke and flame, stumbling, half-blind, until fresh air exploded into Curtis's lungs. They collapsed onto the sand. Paramedics rushed in. No pulse. Curtis couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. CPR began. Compressions. Breaths. Again and again. Seconds stretched into agony. Then Brandon coughed. A violent, life-ripping cough. His eyes flew open. "Dad," he whispered. Curtis was there instantly, hands gripping his son's face. "I've got you," he said, voice breaking. "You're safe." Behind them, Lydia screamed as officers dragged her away in cuffs, rage and terror twisting her face. Gavin dove for the water, only to be hauled out by the Coast Guard like a trapped animal. The helicopter arrived moments later, rotors shredding smoke into the sky. As Brandon was lifted aboard, his hand tightened around Curtis's. "You found me," he murmured. "Always," Curtis said. "I'll always find you." From above, the cabin collapsed inward, flames dying as truth finally surfaced. For the first time since 4:32 a.m. days earlier, Curtis felt something close to relief. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. The helicopter lifted away from the island, as if tearing Brandon from the jaws of death itself. Curtis sat pressed against the metal interior, his knees braced, his hand wrapped tightly around his son's. The rotors thundered overhead, vibrating through his bones, but he barely registered the noise. All of his attention was fixed on the faint rise and fall of Brandon's chest, on the oxygen mask fogging and clearing with each fragile breath. Alive. The word felt unreal, like a sound spoken underwater. Paramedics worked quickly, voices clipped and urgent. Smoke inhalation, dehydration, possible internal injuries. Curtis listened without truly hearing, nodding automatically, his thumb rubbing slow circles over Brandon's knuckles the way he had when Brandon was a child and scraped his knees. The island fell away beneath them, smoke thinning, fire dying, police boats clustering along the shore. Lydia and Gavin were already reduced to figures in custody, small and contained at last. Curtis did not look at them again. They were no longer the center of this story. Brandon was. At Maui Memorial Hospital, time fractured into long hours and short breaths. Curtis paced corridors washed in fluorescent light, replaying the rescue over and over in his mind. Every step he'd taken into that burning cabin felt reckless now that the danger had passed. But he knew, with absolute clarity, that he would do it again without hesitation. A doctor finally approached, exhaustion etched into her face. "He's stable," she said. "You got him here in time." Curtis exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. 3 days later, Brandon was strong enough to talk. Curtis sat beside his bed, the beeping of monitors a steady, grounding rhythm. Captain Boyd pulled a chair close and placed a recorder on the table between them. The room felt heavy with the weight of what was about to be said. "In your own words," Boyd said gently, "tell us what happened." Brandon swallowed. His voice was hoarse, but steady. 2 months ago, he began, "I found messages on Lydia's phone. She was having an affair with Gavin Mercer." Curtis closed his eyes briefly. "When I confronted her, she denied everything." Brandon continued. "Told me I was imagining things, that I was stressed, paranoid." He paused, jaw tightening. "I contacted a divorce lawyer in Seattle. I didn't tell her yet." Boyd nodded. "The life insurance policy? That was her idea," Brandon said. 6 months ago. $3 million. She said it was for our future. She insisted I name her as the beneficiary." Brandon's voice cracked. "I thought she was thinking about us." Curtis felt a familiar ache, the pain of hindsight, sharp and unforgiving. "Tell me about the boat," Boyd said softly. "Gavin invited me fishing," Brandon replied. "So we should bond." Lydia encouraged it. "Packed us lunch." His hands trembled slightly. "On the boat, Gavin handed me a beer. It tasted off, bitter. After that, everything went black." "You were drugged," Boyd said. Brandon nodded. "When I woke up, I was on that island, tied to a bed. They were both there. Lydia didn't even pretend anymore." He looked at Curtis then, eyes dark with memory. "She talked about the money like I was already dead. Told me they'd keep me sedated for a week, then stage a drowning. She said the ocean would erase everything." Curtis's chest tightened painfully. "And the fire?" Boyd asked. Brandon's gaze dropped. "They heard helicopters." Gavin panicked. He said there wasn't time anymore. Brandon swallowed hard. "He set the cabin on fire." Silence filled the room. Boyd switched off the recorder at last. "Thank you," he said. "Based on your testimony and the evidence, Lydia Lawson has been charged with kidnapping, attempted murder, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and first-degree arson. Gavin Mercer faces identical charges." Brandon let out a slow, shaky breath. After Boyd left, Brandon turned his head toward the window, where the Maui coastline glimmered in the distance. "I want to go home," he said quietly. "Back to Seattle." Curtis nodded, emotion clogging his throat. "Then we'll go home." 3 months later, they sat together on Curtis's back porch in Queen, and the evening air cool and familiar. The sun sank toward Puget Sound, painting the water in golden pink. Brandon held a beer loosely in his hand, relaxed in a way Curtis hadn't seen in years. They had found a rhythm again, shared meals, quiet walks, therapy appointments that slowly stitched Brandon back together. Healing wasn't linear, but it was real. I used to think family was paperwork and vows, Brandon said softly. Lydia taught me what it isn't. Curtis glanced at him. So what is it? Brandon smiled, just slightly. It's showing up. Not giving up. Trusting your gut when it sounds crazy. He met Curtis's eyes. You're what family means. Curtis felt his throat tighten. He thought of Louise, her voice, her faith in instincts, her final request. Take care of our son. I promised your mom, Curtis said quietly. And I kept it. The trial ended months later. Lydia was sentenced to 25 years. Gavin received 15. Justice, imperfect but undeniable. Curtis didn't dwell on them. Instead, he and Brandon poured their energy into something new. A fund in Louise's name, helping victims betrayed by those they trusted, turning survival into purpose. As the sun disappeared beyond the water, Curtis reflected on the call that had started everything. The quiet warning that had whispered this isn't right. He had listened. And because he did, his son was alive. Sometimes, love isn't accepting the story you're given. Sometimes, it's refusing to believe it.